Good afternoon, Madam President. It's 12 noon. I started the recording.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. We're going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Levenstein.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence for all of those in our community who need our support. Thank you.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton,
Here.
Ms. Screen,
Here.
Dr. Henderson,
Here.
Mr. Howard,
Here.
Mr. Levenstein,
Here.
Ms. Maida,
Here.
Ms. Mineo,
Here.
Mr. Stridiron.
Here.
Mr. Walker.
Here. Here.
Thank you. We're going to go right to my section, and we're going to start with 2.1, resolution to adopt the policy on the first read, 2160, School District Officer and Employee Code of Ethics. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So move.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Stridiron.
Thank you, Madam President. So basically, on page 4 was the only change that was made from what I can see, because that's the only item that's in red. So is this addition to the policy, can that be used retroactively to something that happened prior to the approval of this policy, or only from the time that this policy is approved?
Thank you. I'm going to call on Mr. Shaw to answer that.
Okay, Madam President, I'd like a consensus from the board to allow me to answer that.
You're on mute, ma'am.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Mr. McCoy, can you go around and ask for a consensus to allow Mr. Shaw to answer that?
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green, Dr. Henderson,
Yes, of course.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levenstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes,
Mr. Stridiron,
Yes.
and Mr. Walker.
Yes.
thank you.
Sorry. This is Ms. Green saying, this is Ms. Green saying, yes, I couldn't get to the mute button quick enough, but yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so in answer to Mr. Stridiron's question, in our opinion, it would be of prospective effect only, not retroactive effect.
And does this clause only deal with breaches of confidentiality, or can board members who neglect their duty also be open to lawsuits from this point on?
I think that question is beyond the scope of the wording change. I think the wording change is pretty clear as to what it's directed at.
And I do have another question on page 6, if no one else has questions.
Does anyone else have a question? Mr. Stridiron, I see no other hands. Go ahead.
Thank you. So it says here, basis for removal of a board member. The first item, it says for violating their oath of office and or neglecting their duty. What is the process for removing a board member for neglecting their duty?
The primary process would be a commissioner's appeal, and it may also be processed through a board-directed removal hearing.
So when you say a commissioner's appeal, that would be from either someone outside the board requesting that the commissioner remove a board member.
I'm going to jump in here. Mr. Stridiron, that's not the question. The question is just the part in red that we're changing. That's what we're voting on today is.
Oh, I understand that, but if we're dealing with the policy as a whole, we're still approving the policy as written. So,
No, we're approving the policy as amended.
but I do have a question regarding the policy. Is it to remove a board member through the commissioner? Can someone outside the board request that to the commissioner?
Madam President, I haven't been authorized by the board to start to give legal advice to community members. All of that is available through research and documents.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton,
yes,
Ms. Green,
No,
Dr. Henderson,
No.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
yes,
Ms. Mineo,
Yes,
Mr. Stridiron,
No,
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
That item passes.
thank you. We're going to move on to item 2.2, a resolution to authorize the board president to execute employment-related agreement with Dr. Roberto Padilla. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Before we do questions or discussion, can we have a consensus of the board to allow our attorney to give us clarification on all these items? Mr. Levinstein, hang on one second, okay? Mr. McCoy, can you poll the board, please?
Ms. Green,
yes,
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
yes,
Ms. Mineo,
Yes,
Mr. Stridiron,
yes,
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton.
yes,
okay. So the last thing I'm going to say is please maintain your questions so about the body of the agreement, the letter of resignation, and the press release. So please keep your questions to that. Mr. Levinstein, I see your hand.
So I was wondering if the Appendix B, which is the district statement, can be read into the record at this time, since it's on page 11 and many people may not have gotten up to that point. Is that a possibility?
Mr. Shaw, I need your help.
With the board consensus, you could certainly read that into the record. It's in the public domain and it's part of the proposed settlement agreement that Dr. Padilla has signed.
So, Mr. McCoy, can you read that page? Or do you need more information from Mr. Levinstein, what he wants? And then first we'll do a consensus and then could you be ready to read? Thank you. Mr. McCoy, do a consensus on wanting to read it.
Ms. Burton,
yes,
Ms. Green,
no,
Dr. Henderson,
No.
Mr. Howard,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
yes,
Ms. Mineo,
Yes,
Mr. Stridiron,
no,
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Yes to read.
go ahead, Mr. McCoy.
Dr. Roberto Padilla and the Newburgh Board of Education have reached an agreement for his separation from employment with the district. Despite several misinformed media reports, there have been no adjudications between the district and Dr. Padilla with the determination that he is guilty of any misconduct. Late this past summer, the board received complaints under the district's sexual harassment policy from two former employees who were at a social event during a conference with Dr. Padilla and others in early August. As required by district policy, the board president arranged for independent investigators to proceed based on claims of sexual harassment. Reports were received by the board from the investigators who reviewed certain allegations in common and reached inconsistent conclusions about the import of what occurred. Dr. Padilla denied the allegations against him, and several witnesses who were interviewed expressed their views that no wrongdoing occurred. It is undisputed that the allegations would have not constitute the elements of any crime, and the allegations might not constitute sufficient grounds to set aside Dr. Padilla's employment contract. The allegations made this past summer were the first time any allegations of this nature were brought to the Board of Education regarding Dr. Padilla. In July 2021, based on evaluated job performance, Dr. Padilla was given a contract extension providing a maximum contract set term to expire June 2026, with additional compensation making him the second highest paid school superintendent in Orange County. By reaching this separation agreement, the district can look forward to focusing its attention on establishing a new administration, and Dr. Padilla can look forward to his future career endeavors. That's the end of the statement, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stridiron, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam President. I only have 4 questions and then a statement to read, but I'll just ask my question one at a time, and maybe other people have questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does this agreement prohibit the Newburgh School Board from hiring a new superintendent of schools for the next 2 years?
Mr. Shaw? Mr. Shaw, you're muted. Start over.
It does not preclude the district from hiring a new superintendent. This isn't a situation akin to a substitute. Then you're expecting the incumbent to return. Here, the incumbent will not be returning. Therefore, there's no impediment to hiring a new superintendent.
Will Dr. Padilla still retain the title of superintendent of schools for the next 2 years?
If he does not obtain other employment, he is a superintendent on leave.
So a new superintendent, if hired, would still be considered interim? Because you can't have 2 superintendents of the Newburgh schools at the same time.
He will have no active role as superintendent. He would be on a leave of absence.
Okay, and is there any provision in this agreement to prevent Roberto Padilla from ever being rehired by the Newburgh School Board?
There is not such a provision.
So after the 2 years of him not being here, the school board could rehire him and he comes back.
That's going to depend upon circumstances. If you have a superintendent with a durational contract, that will not happen in 2 years.
And can, for the next 2 years, Roberto Padilla represent himself at conferences that he goes to himself as a superintendent of Newburgh schools?
He should not do that. That would be a disingenuous representation.
But is he prevented from doing so?
I think if he attempted to do that, that would be clarified by the board.
Is the district legally responsible over the next 2 years for any actions that Roberto Padilla makes?
Not going forward. He wouldn't have authority to act within his position while on a leave of absence.
If Ms. Mineo, if does anybody else have any questions, or else I'll read a statement.
Hang on, let me ask. Anybody else have any questions or statements? Dr. Henderson, I see your hand.
I have a question, but I can wait after Mr. Stridiron's statement. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Stridiron, read along.
Thank you. Today is a watershed moment for the Newburgh School District. After 8 years of failed leadership by Roberto Padilla, we may witness failed leadership by a majority of this Board of Education. I want to thank every member of the community that has voiced their opinion on this agreement in every form of media. You have expressed the same concerns that a minority of the board has been telling those that have crafted this payout. This agreement spits in the face of the 2 victims that had the courage to come forward and will discourage others that are out there from ever coming forward. Yesterday, Roberto Padilla was quoted in the local media saying, "I appreciate the district acknowledging there was no wrongdoing." Does Padilla think we are all stupid to believe this lie? As released by the law firm of Shaw, Pearlson, and May on behalf of the district, the Gordon report states on page 15, quote, "Based on the Title VII analysis above, it appears that Dr. P's actions also violate Title IX." End quote. Those are federal statutes that deal with sexual harassment. Roberto Padilla violated federal law. The board knows this. David Shaw knows this. Roberto Padilla knows this. His victims know this. And now the public knows this. The statement in this agreement, quote, "The parties are desirous of resolving their differences and avoiding costly and disruptive litigation," is very misleading. The district's retainer agreement covers the cost of legal representation in these matters. The true savings would be on behalf of Roberto Padilla. He would not have to expend his own funds to pay for legal representation. For many months, the majority of the school board, David Shaw and Roberto Padilla, have conspired to come to this agreement you see before you today. There were many opportunities to file charges against Padilla after the investigations were completed. It would have taken just a few months starting in October to go through the arbitration process outlined in the contract. Don't believe the lies being told to you that there was no choice other than this agreement. The plan all along has been for Padilla to receive this payout, take some time to rest at home, work on his book, and then at the end of the time frame, be rehired by the school board to return as the white knight to save our schools. The majority of the board and David Shaw has helped craft this document in such a manner as to reward Padilla for his behavior. What a great example to all women and girls in our district. All young men will see this payout as an example of how to get rich by harassing women and girls. The public needs to remember the names of all board members who vote to approve this payout. These board members sit on the board of directors of local entities such as St. Luke's Hospital and the Armory. The public needs to find out why these organizations condone members of their board of directors providing $1 million payout to someone found to have violated federal statutes dealing with sexual harassment. Board of Education members have a duty to represent the values of our community. The payout to Padilla does not end today. Any lawsuit filed against Roberto Padilla will be legally covered by the school district and paid by taxpayer money. It is almost a guarantee that the victims will seek compensation for what they were put through. The cost to the taxpayers could total many millions of dollars, and this agreement indemnifies Roberto Padilla of any responsibility. You can thank the majority of the board, Shaw, Pearlson, and May, for crafting such a generous agreement. The last page of this agreement, Appendix B, is a statement carefully worded to make everyone think that nothing ever happened and that Roberto Padilla was a wrongly accused man. The term inconsistent conclusions is meant for you to think that both investigations found no wrongdoing. Remember, there were two victims, and the investigators were only dealing with one victim each. It would be impossible for each investigator to come to the same exact conclusion if they were investigating two separate matters. The attorneys for both sides have carefully selected words that attempt to mislead you. After the agenda items are concluded today, Madam President, I would make a motion to add an item to this agenda. I will propose that both investigations be made public. The only redactions would be the names of the victims and the witnesses. Let the public decide if they were inconsistent conclusions. Anything less would be a continuation of the conspiracy in Newburgh. The phrase, "It is, quote, undisputed that the allegations would not constitute the elements of a crime," end quote, is not valid. No law enforcement agency was provided these reports for review. They are the determiners of whether the allegations constitute a crime. The district attorney wants to see the reports. The phrase, quote, "the allegations made this past summer were the first time any allegations of this nature were brought to the Board of Education regarding Dr. Padilla," end quote, is not true. Both me and another board member were present and witnessed this. I will be voting no on this agreement. I am in favor of filing charges against Roberto Padilla and letting the arbitrator decide based on the evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold your, whatever you're going to do until the end, okay? First, Dr. Henderson, then Mr. Walker, and then Ms. Burton. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I just wanted to touch base on the statement portion where it is the verbiage used is inconsistent conclusions. Is Mr. Shaw able to give basically a consensus of the conclusions that were made from each report, just for clarity, especially for the public? I don't know if that's a possibility. If you could help me with that.
Mr. Shaw, are you able to do that?
I don't think I could do it to the extent that Dr. Henderson is looking for it. However, you may recall that each of the board members was given an opportunity to read both reports to ascertain whether witnesses in common and events in common were referred to in each of the reports, and also what the findings were vis-a-vis Title IX, Title VII, and the New York State Human Rights Law. So I would just remind the board members as to what they had read before. And I'd also like to point out that these reports are essentially inquests. They're not a hearing. And to terminate the superintendent would require a full-scale due process hearing in the form of an arbitration. And the joint statement makes it clear that there hasn't been an adjudication. There have been these inquests in the nature of investigations. And that, I think, is about as much as I can say right now.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
Yes, I just want to make sure that if this passes, this will be a clean break with Dr. Padilla. Hello?
Mr. Shaw? Mr. Shaw?
Yes, this is a clean break in the sense that the settlement agreement includes release language, release in favor of all of the officers of the board. That includes the board members, all of the employees and agents of the board, for any cause of action from the past. So that would include defamation. That would be protective of the district and individuals. Likewise, there's a release as to any civil liability that might be alleged against Dr. Padilla. And he would have that right anyway, pursuant to the statutory indemnification provisions in the New York State education law.
Mr. Walker, I see your hand again. Do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I'm asking that question because I'm very concerned that we will not have a clean or good transition when we go to the next superintendent. I'm particularly concerned, and maybe this can be answered today, about information concerning the capital gains projects, the refurbishing that we intended to do, and the like. All that was very detailed to me, and I would want to see it continue without interruption and the like. And I guess there's no way to guarantee that that can happen. So, all right. Thank you.
You're muted, Ms. Maneo.
Sorry, Mrs. Burton.
I have a question in regards to the agreement on page 3, number 9. In regards to, can you, Mr. Shaw, embellish a little bit about number 9, that each individual board member agree not to make disparaging comments about each other? Because, I'm at a point where I'm feeling when when the use of the word "the board" is made, it's made collectively, and yet we are individuals making our own determination and decisions. And, it just, and when a board member in the name of Mr. Stridiron turns around and says in his statement, majority of the board or failed leadership of board members, I mean, I take offense to that, because I hear the same information, I get the same documentation that everyone else gets, and yet I feel as if it's being, those of us who are taking all the information that is given to us and making it a determination, but also making a determination in terms of what it ultimately could mean for the school district, and then getting outside people, making disparaging comments and all of this going on because a board member does not want our current superintendent to be here any longer. There's a lot of information people don't have. And it seems to me that there's some information that certain people on the board are perpetuating in the community. And I take offense to it. And I want to know, as a board member, what does a board member do in response to number 9 on page 3 to protect themselves against disparaging comments made by board members about other board members? What is the process that we take to protect our own reputations?
I'd like to address the question about paragraph 9 and what that means. And as to the broader matter that you're discussing, I think that's something for a subsequent executive session. But paragraph 9 means that from the time after the vote, if this agreement is approved, that the board and the individual members of the board are under a duty by reason of this agreement not to make disparaging comments about the superintendent, about Dr. Padilla. And it's a mutual responsibility. And as I mentioned before, there is general release language that will exonerate, will protect the board members from defamation-based litigation up until today, but not tomorrow. Now, as to tomorrow, the policy that the board voted on earlier today was to discourage board members from defamatory statements, because while they, under certain circumstances, may have immunity against a civil liability, that immunity cannot be bootstrapped by the district, and they can create liability for the district. That has been a concern, and it will be a concern. Right now, the release language will address that, but only through today, only until the vote on this agreement, should the agreement succeed.
Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to just agree with how my colleague, Ms. Burton, has so eloquently put, and I agree with her 100%. I think that the attack that's coming on individuals on this board is unfounded. And I think that it's something that is not necessary at this time. But my question is to Mr. Shaw in regards to the settlement. It's been constantly put out in the public that he's being paid, Dr. Padilla is being paid $1 million. And I, for clarification purposes, once he receives future employment, does our payment to Dr. Padilla stop, or does it continue in ad nauseum? Does he continue to get money from us and from his future employer, or is the agreement until he seeks future employment? Like, if he gets a job in the next 6 months or to a year, does our financial obligation to him stop or continue?
Okay, well, the statement of $1 million, I have no idea where that comes from in terms of what this settlement actually provides for. Dr. Padilla will be entitled to payments equivalent to his current salary, not any future increase that had been indicated in his fourth addendum agreement. And his payout for vacation days is limited to 45, and then the sick days based upon what was in place at the beginning of the 21-22 school year. Should he obtain other employment with health insurance benefits, then that obligation will cut off within the 23-month period of this agreement.
So hypothetically speaking, if he were to go out, seek employment and obtain a job in the next 6 months, then our obligation to him is done, correct?
For salary, it would be continuing for the 23 months. And he's giving up well more than 2 years of compensation at the tail end of his 5-year contract. It's about 2 years and 7 months.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Stridiron, can I call on Mrs. Maida first and then you? Because you had a big chunk of time. So Mrs. Maida.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam President. I just have a little paragraph, or not even a paragraph to read. Despite the misrepresentation of information that's been out there, I think it's just time to move on, take the responsibility that we have to our students and our staff and our teachers, and do what's important to Newburgh right now. And that's the instructional program that we have in front of us and that we try to work with every day. So I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stridiron?
Thank you, Madam President. So I have two comments. The first, Mr. Shaw said Dr. Padilla is like giving up a lot. Well, the two victims gave up everything. I don't see any remorse by this district. There's no statement to the victims apologizing. There's no statement from Dr. Padilla apologizing. And as far as disparaging, I would like to know, is the truth disparaging? Because that's what I'm giving. And for the last 8 years, certain board members have disparaged me so much, and especially in executive session. That's their comfort zone, so they can attack me, call me a racist, call me all kinds of names, threaten to fight me. So you do it in executive session, I have the balls to do it in public. I talk the truth. You know what? This is too much. You guys are too much. You're not listening to the people.
You're on mute, ma'am.
Still on mute. Mr. Levinstein.
Thank you, Madam President. So this is not the outcome that I would prefer, and I'm guessing it's not the outcome that any of the board members would prefer. But our choice today, we have two choices: vote yes or no for this agreement. If we vote yes, it means we have a separation agreement with Dr. Padilla and our relationship with him ends. If we vote no, our only other choice today is to vote no. That means Dr. Padilla stays on as a paid suspended superintendent, and this process goes on for a long, long time with an unknown outcome. So that is the reason why I'm going to vote yes. And I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, I see your hand. Hang on a second. Mr. Shaw first.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd just like to ask Mr. Stridiron to make sure that he consults with the district's legal counsel about what would constitute defamation going forward, because it can create liability for the district as long as he's a trustee. So I'd like him to do that among whatever other legal counsel he may seek.
I would be happy to meet with you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
Yes, I totally agree with Mr. Shaw. And also, I like to remind people who may have forgotten what the role is of an executive session. That's where the arguments are supposed to take place. And should one person decide that they're not comfortable with the outcome, then they have perhaps a right to go to the public. They certainly have no right to attack the process that is supposed to maintain an equilibrium of balance within the board and the community. So I would say some people might need to go and review what the behavioral practices of a board member are before they open their mouths. Thank you.
Mr. Howard?
Yes, Madam President, I'd like to call the question, please.
I second that.
We don't need, Mr. McCoy, we don't need a vote on that, right? We just go to vote?
There's no more discussion, but if there's more discussion, you would need to vote, yeah.
I don't see anybody else with their hands up, so let's go to vote.
All right, this is on 2.2. Ms. Green,
No.
Dr. Henderson,
As a father, taxpayer, Board of Ed member, Newburgh alumni, and fifth generation Newburgh resident, I do not agree with this agreement and this statement. My vote is no.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Vineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
No.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton.
Yes.
That item passes.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 2.3, resolution to appoint interim superintendent of schools. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Howard, you have your hand up. Do you have a question? No? Okay. Mrs. Burton, I see your hand.
Yeah, so who are we appointing? This is just, would you just clarify the resolution, please? Because
Mr. Shaw, can you give us some clarification on this resolution and why we have to
yes.
do it?
Yes. So Mr. Forget, in his role as deputy superintendent, was paid a $50 per diem to serve in the absence of the superintendent. Now that the superintendent will be permanently absent, it's appropriate to appoint an interim superintendent to fulfill all of those duties. This resolution is worded to appoint him to that position pending further action of the board that can take place at whatever the future time is, but also to grant him a leave of absence from his current contractual position. And this would take effect immediately.
thank you. I think that's important that everyone who's also the public understands what this means. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mr. Stridiron.
Thank you, Madam President. So what's the pay rate of the new position?
That hasn't been established yet. So he'll be paid at his deputy superintendent's salary, pending further action of the board at some point in time. More importantly, it maintains the benefits that he enjoys.
So if he goes to a conference, what title will he have?
He would be the interim superintendent of schools.
Which is the same, I believe, as he has right now, right?
No, he's acting now.
Acting, okay.
Acting it is like a substitute. Interim is because there's nobody in the position anymore.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Dr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
No.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green.
Yes.
Okay, now we're at the end of the meeting. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting, please.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second that.
Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Howard,
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein,
Yes.
Ms. Maida,
Yes.
Ms. Mineo,
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
Ms. Green,
Yes.
Dr. Henderson.
Yes, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody.